Okay, in the first question, how can the lockdown of the mega city in China influence the aggregate demand in China, and explain my reason? So my reason is that because the city is get locked down, of course the port will also get locked down. The transportation will get locked down. So the net export will decrease. And beside the net export, the consumption will also decrease. And why is that? Because people in the city will reduce their frequency to go out and buy their products because it's too risky to go out. And so thus the consumption will get locked down. So due to these two reasons, the aggregate demand will decrease. So that's the first question. Aggregate demand will decrease. Okay, the second question. I want to use two graphs to explain this question. The first is the aggregate demand and supply. So this is a short aggregate demand, and this is short run aggregate supply. This is a long run aggregate supply curve. So because in the first question, we know the aggregate demand will shift to left in the short run. Okay, so the equilibrium point will move from here to here. So the price level will decrease from P1 to P2. So the price level will decrease, and the output will move from Y1 to Y2. So the output will also decrease. And then the Phillips curve, because we know the shifting of aggregate demand will cause the moving of short run Phillips curve. So this is short run Phillips curve. This. Oh, this is long run Phillips curve. So the aggregate demand shift to left. So the point will move from equilibrium point to right along the Phillips curve to here. So the inflation will decrease from here 1 to 2, and the unemployment rate will increase from natural to 1. So we can summarize the short run. The effect will include the price level decrease and the output decrease, and the inflation also decrease, but the unemployment rate will decrease. That's the short run. But in the long run, due to the stick wages effect, we know the cost of factories and operations and business will decrease. So they were willing to hire more workers. So the output will decrease. So the short run aggregate supply curve will shift to right and back to the equilibrium point, or the original output from here to here. Okay, so the output will move from Y1 to Y2, but the price level will decrease more from P2 to P3. So we know the shifting of short run aggregate supply will cause the short run Phillips curve to shift. So the short run aggregate supply curve shift to right, then the short run Phillips curve will shift to left. So back to the unemployment natural rate, natural point of unemployment here. From U1 back to UN, but the inflation will just still the same, U2 pi 2. So we can summarize in the long run. The price level will decrease more, but the output will back to the just back to the Y1. Then the inflation will send. and the U will just back to the natural. So that's the second question. Okay. Oh, sorry. The third question. In theory, what should policymakers in China do in response to the short-run economic fluctuation? So the policymaker can use two policies. Like the first one is monetary policy, the second one is fiscal policy. And why is that? Because in the first question, we know the aggregate demand shift to left. So the policymaker can use monetary policy like buying bonds to increase the money supply. So the interest rate will decrease and the investment will increase, and then the aggregate demand will shift to right. And so force the aggregate demand back to the equilibrium point from AD1 to AD2. Okay, that's the monetary policy. And besides, except the monetary policy, you can also use the fiscal policy, like increase the government spending and lower the tax. So use these two policies, the aggregate demand will also shift to right. That's the two policies that a policymaker in China can use. Okay, the next question. So recently in Taiwan, the government gave in response to the pandemic, they gave out the money. So by giving out the money to the people, so encourage them to buy more products, so the consumption will increase. So that's one kind of fiscal policy. So to encourage people to buy more, so the consumption will decrease, then the aggregate demand will increase. Because due to the pandemic, Taiwan also people also consumption also become less, so the aggregate demand will just shift to left. So in order to react to these kind of impacts, so the government give out the money, so the consumption will increase, so the aggregate demand will shift to right, back to the normal equilibrium point. Dimensional from aggregate supply. Okay. Okay, the second policy that Taiwan use is reduce the tax in many aspects. So in the third question, we said that one of the fiscal policy is to reduce the tax. So by reduce the tax, the aggregate demand, lower the tax. The aggregate demand will also shift to right. So that's the policy that recently Taiwanese government used to react to the pandemic. Okay, that's the answer of first question.
My name is Chen Xingyuan. I am a business administration major. I'm going to explain question 2. The topic is following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The European Union adopted a number of sanctions in an attempt to immobilize the war effort. These sanctions will have an impact on all economies of the EU. The solution to question 1 is these sanctions target the financial, trade, energy, transport, technology, and defense sectors. The following examples are restricted access to EU primary and secondary capital markets for certain Russian banks and companies. Prohibition on public financing or investment in Russia. Prohibition on new investments in the Russian energy sector. Prohibition on transactions with the Russian Central Bank. It is prohibited to sell, supply, transfer, or export dual-use goods and technology to any person or entity in Russia or for use in Russia, and closure of EU airspace to all Russian-owned and Russian-registered aircraft. Closure of EU ports to Russian vessels. Solutions to question 2. Because of the previous sanction, it will cause aggregate supply and aggregate demand to shift left, and the intersection will move from A to B. The price level will also increase, and the quantity of output will decrease. The quantity of output is measured by real GDP, so the real GDP will decrease as well. Let's move on to Phillips curve. Because of the decrease of aggregate supply, can worsen the short-run trade-off between unemployment and inflation. So the Phillips curve will shift right, and the intersection will move from A to B. In the end, the inflation rate and unemployment rate will increase. Solutions to question 3. In order to get Europe go through this crisis, we need to reduce the inflation rate by reducing the money supply. As we know, higher interest rates decrease the economy's demand, resulting in lower economic growth and lower inflation. In order to increase interest rate, we need to decrease the money supply in the loanable funds market. As for decrease the unemployment rate, we need to increase aggregate demand and the rate of economic growth. With an increase in aggregate demand, there will be an increase in real GDP. If firms produce more, there will be an increase in demand for workers and therefore lower demand deficient unemployment. Also, with higher aggregate demand and strong economic growth, fewer firms will go bankrupt, meaning fewer job losses. Solutions to number question 4. I don't think EU governments can use a single policy to simultaneously solve both inflation and unemployment problem. Because the economy is large and complex, I think government should have specific ways to deal with inflation and unemployment individually. That's the end of it. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone, my name is Max and I'm now going to share you guys my answers for question 3 and question 4. Okay, for question 3. In January 2018, US President Donald Trump began setting tariffs and other trade barriers on China with the goal of forcing it to make changes to what the US says are unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. The Trump administration stated that these practices may contribute to the US-China trade deficit and that the Chinese government requires transfer of American technology to China. In response to US trade measures, the Chinese government accused that Trump administrations of engaging in nationalist protectionism and took retaliatory action. After the trade war escalated through 2019, in January 2020, the two sides reached a tense phase one agreement. It expired in December 2021, with China failing by a wide margin to purchase American goods and services as agreed. By the end of the Trump presidency, the trade war was widely characterized as a failure. Okay, so that's the details of the trade war between USA and China. For the second questions, I'm gonna show you my diagram is here. Okay, now I'm going to show you my diagram and explain why. Because the tariff is imposed by USA, the USA citizens will spend more money to buy foreigner imports goods. So the demand for money will shift left in the foreign exchange market. So the real exchange rate will go up. So that is called the appreciation. And appreciation of the dollar in the foreign exchange market encourage imports and discourage exports, which means the net export will go down. This effects offset the initial increase in the net exports due to the tariff. If the tariff imposed, the goods go into your country will go down because it's more expensive. So the appreciation offset this effect. So trade policies do not affect the trade balance. And there is no change in the interest rate because nothing happens in the loan bond funds market. And there will be no change in the net exports too. So this is my answer. Okay, for the question 3, my opinion is disagree because NCO and NX remains the same. Okay, for questions 4, I gonna tell you guys what is quantitative easing policy and what is the difference between the conventional monetary policy and QE. Okay, QE is a monetary policy whereby a central bank purchases predetermined amounts of government bonds or other financial assets. For example, the municipal bonds, corporate bonds, and stocks. They buy these bonds and assets in order to inject money into the economy and to expand economic activities. So QE is an unconventional form of monetary policies, which is usually used when inflation is very low or even negative, and when standard monetary policy instruments have become ineffective. And there are 3 effects that when used the QE. For the first one, it reduced the cost of borrowing among enterprises and the public and banks. For the second one, it provides sufficient liquidity in the market. And for the third one, it stimulates the overall economy. Next, I'm gonna talk about the differences between the conventional monetary policies and QE. Everyone knows that conventional monetary policies will face a problem, that is liquidity trap. When the money demand is perfectly elastic at a low interest rate, the increase in money supply would not have any impact on the interest rate. So what can we do when the interest rate is very low? We can use QE. So the difference is the using timing. Fed use QE when the interest rate is very close to zero. And for the second difference is Fed will buy more and higher risk bonds, like long-term bonds, when the Fed use QE policies. Okay, for the second questions, I'll tell you guys a historical example to show you the Fed uses QE policies in response to an event in the United States. After the 2008 financial tsunami, because the US federal interest rate is close to zero, it is no longer possible to improve economic problems with traditional monetary policies. The US Federal Council began to launch an QE policies. So this is very renowned historical example that Fed used in the United States. So for the number 3 questions, I'm gonna use a diagram to explain these policies can solve the problem caused by this event. Okay, first of all, the money supply will shift left and the interest rate will go down. When the interest rates go down, people want to invest more. So the quantity demand, the quantity of output will go up. So you can see on the number 3 diagram, the price level remains the same, but the investment will increase and the aggregate demands will shift left. This is the effect of the QE policies. And thank you, everyone.
Hi, my name is Roy, and I am responsible for the last question. The last question is about European sovereign debt crisis 10 years ago. And here is the background. The definition of this crisis is that the financial crisis that occurred in several European countries due to high government debt and institutional failures. It can be contributed to for main reasons. First, in 2008, there is a global financial crisis, which affects many countries, especially those who are relatively poor, like Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, and which known as PIGS. The economical crisis makes them unable to repay their loan and almost lose their credit. And to help them, countries like Germany take responsibility to repay their loan. In case PIGS become bankruptcy, it will affect the whole euro because they share the common currency. Although the monetary policy sounds good, the lack of aggregated fiscal policy in different countries makes the crisis unsolvable. To analyze the effect of this crisis, we can draw the following picture. The question said, many investors withdraw their capital from the Eurozone. So, for the Eurozone, the net capital outflow will rise, and the rise of net capital outflow will lead to the rise of interest rate. Furthermore, the rise of net capital outflow will also influence the net export to rise. As the net export rising, the real exchange rate falls. As we have learned, the real exchange rate falls, which means euro depreciated and may benefit exporters like Germany. And here's my reference.